once, but it didn't happen. As to prove his thoughts, the other merely raised an eyebrow, unsure of what the other wanted to supposedly get started on. What are you talking about? This is outrageous! Get off me! Shadow protested, trying to escape once again. Sonic smiled innocently and got a bit closer, his tan, bare chest brushing up against Shadow's white, fluffy chest fur with one of his legs rubbed against the other's groin. Shadow's eyes widened, and his cheeks turned a dark pink as he tried to stifle back a moan from the friction between his legs. But Sonic's sensitive ears heard it. You like that, huh? Cobalt teased, as he licked the side of Shadow's face seductively. Shadow closed his eyes, and turned his face away in embarrassment. This wasn't the blue-eyed speedster, he thought. He whined as the friction continued, but a bit harder this time. He tilted his head up and moaned softly. Sonic found this surprising, as he didn't think that Shadow would give him so easily. Maybe it's time, he thought. Shadow inhaled sharply, as he felt something as he felt something rub up against his stomach.
On the road.
He looked down curiously and saw it was the other's erection. He blushed.
Don't stop, I need this.
He blushed profusely and gulped. Like what you see, Sonic taunted? Have you gone mad? Shadow asked, staring into the other's eyes. But all he saw was lust. It was then that he knew. Nothing he could do would change the stubborn hedgehog's mind. It was also the second time he had been completely powerless. Yeah, he knew he could easily Chaos Spear Sonic out of the way. But he didn't want to hurt his enemy, as Mobians these days so-called their not-so-super-close peers. Shadow growled, obviously displeased at the situation.
Shut up, nerd!
But he decided to go along with it. He hoped after this was over, they could just pretend like it never happened. Just move on. Just get it over with. After his thinking, Shadow raised his head to look back at the other. Then he realized that Sonic, all this time, had been waiting to see if it was okay. That he wasn't rushing him. He also noticed that Sonic's eyes were glazed over, probably deep in thought just as he was. Shadow concluded. He sighed and waited as Sonic's ears perked up and his eyes refocused. Fine, Faker. But don't think that this will make us be more than we are now. Got it? Sonic nodded, but his mouth formed into a small frown as he realized this is nothing more than a spur-of-the-moment thing for Shadow. But he thought, at least Shadow's not nervous, and I'll still get to make the sexy hedgehog line. Sonic then gestured over to the queen-sized bed, letting go of the other's wrist to actually take hold of his hand. Shadow grunted, feeling his tan, gentle fingers intertwined with his. He didn't even know why they were in his bedroom. As he remembered, Sonic called him, wanting to talk since he was bored. That's the blue hedgehog for you, he thought. His thoughts were cut off as Sonic guided him, letting Ebony lay down first, then proceeding to lie on top of him. As they stared into each other's eyes, Ruby meeting Emerald. No sound was heard but the breathing of the two. Shadow felt Cobalt's breath as Sonic closed his eyes and leaned in to trap their lips in a passionate kiss. Shadow stared, wide-eyed, not at all understanding what feeling was starting to take him over. But after a few seconds, he decided to kiss back and close his eyes. Sonic grinded against the other, and that caught Shadow off guard. Breaking the kiss, he threw his head back and let out a moan, making Sonic smirk and start kissing the darker hedgehog's neck, trying to take it as slow as possible,
That concludes this round
until he couldn't handle it anymore.
Faggots, 37.
Sonic moved his head to give the other more access to his vulnerable flesh.
Teams are being scrambled.
Oh, hell yeah!
Mission begins in 60 seconds.
He could feel slightly pointy teeth nibble him every once in a while, and a sandpapery tongue lick his collarbone. His ear twitched as he heard Sonic mumble something. He wasn't sure what he said, but he figured it was something dirty. He moved the foreplaying to continue, but it never did. Shadow opened his eyes, which were tightly shut the whole time, and looked to see Sonic hovering slightly above him, an eyebrow raised in question. "Well?" Sonic asked patiently. Well, what?" Shadow replied, his voice shaky. Sonic giggled and kissed Shadow again. "I asked if I could put it in." He then gestured to his throbbing erection, already dripping with free cum.
Do not let him.
Shadow blushed once. He looked and turned away. Sonic sighed and sat up, his cock now fully visible. And he wasn't one bit ashamed of it.
That was good.
Shadow pushed himself up on his elbows, staring at the other as he thought hastily. He sighed once. He got an idea of the other's ears perked up to listen for the darker hedgehog's answer. No, not yet. Sonic's eyebrow rose once again at the not yet part, and Shadow continued. "I have an idea. I may not be ready, but doing this might emphasize my hormones so we can get started." Shadow got onto his knees and pushed Sonic down by his chest so that he was now lying down. Sonic didn't resist, for he was eager to find out what Shadow was planning. He watched as Shadow put his arms around on either side of his head and lowered his head in between his legs. Sonic's eyes widened, now understanding where this was going. He could feel the other's hot breath on his prick, making it quake. Shadow watched as Sonic propped himself up on his elbows to watch him, his eyes half-lidded and a knowing smirk on his face. Shadow blushed and returned his eyes to the twitching organ in front of him. He gave the tip a soft lick. He heard the other gasp slightly. He smirked and took it into his mouth. Sonic groaned as Shadow realized he started taking the whole thing. And getting himself over again as he started bobbing his head.
So what's on up in the chair, Bubble?
Sonic moaned and tilted his head back, panting. He asked, "You sure you haven't done this before? You're really good." He received a glare from the darker hedgehog before continuing. Shadow started getting into the hang of things, Sonic noted. His tan cheeks were now a hot pink as he continued his actions. His ears directed towards the other, listening as he occasionally let out a moan or a sigh in pleasure, and his eyes half-lidded, watching the cock as it twitched, as he licked and sucked seductively. Sonic felt that he was getting close as he moaned Shadow's name, begging for him to go faster. The other didn't respond after a few seconds, so he decided to take matters into his own hands, literally. Shadow felt a hand wrap around the base of his left ear and looked up in question, but not stopping. He saw the other's cheeks were bright pink, and his ears were swerved to the side. Shadow noticed that Sonic was also clutching the sheets behind him desperately, and he immediately got the message.
Additional time has been awarded.
The cart is bloody stopped!
He smirked and let a fan graze the vulnerable skin of the other, watching as Sonic gnashed his teeth in slight pain. But the force did not subside. He sighed, noticing as Sonic panted, waiting for his approval. He nodded slightly, thinking it wouldn't be too bad not to be the one in control for a while. The other smirked and let his head fall back onto the soft bedding as he forced the ebony hedgehog to take it all in his mouth until he felt soft skin reach his hips. He glanced down to see the pained expression of the other. Shadow was looking directly back at him, the eye underneath the ear he was grabbing shut tight as he notably gagged somewhat. Sonic lessened his grip on the other's ear and looked back at the ceiling before forcing Shadow's head up slowly. He felt the cool air on his penis as the warm, wet cavern left him. and grunted, as he then shoved the other's head back down, quite forcefully, thrusting upwards as well. He heard the other groan in reply to his action, and gag.
Congratulations.
Sonic thought he should be less careless,
Additional time.
but he was almost at his peak, and he desperately needed this. He closed his eyes and put his other hand to work by grabbing the other ear, repeatedly thrusting into Shadow's mouth, listening as Shadow grunted and groaned in discomfort. Shadow looked up once again as he heard a gasp from Sonic the Hedgehog. He let himself get shoved downwards again, now used to the feeling of something so large in his throat. But this time, he felt a hot liquid fill his mouth. He struggled, but the tan hands holding him prevented him from getting up. He moaned as he felt the seemingly endless stream of fluid. After a few seconds, he felt the hands leave him and immediately sat up, coughing and gagging. Sonic watched as the other lurked forward, and as everybody...
The bloody car's not moving!
The bomb has almost reached the final terminus.
Medic!
Don't stop now!
Victory.
Shadow looked up once again. Sonic looked back up as Shadow looked away. He eyed the small mess he made on the other's fur, now slightly slick from sweating, and crawled up to Shadow. He grabbed Shadow's wrist and licked off the tiny puddle of his essence before kissing.
What's your tumbler? I need to know
Shadow
your tumbler.
broke the kiss
Oh
and
my
bit
god,
his
I need
lip
to know your
before
tumbler
asking,
so bad. What's your tumbler?
"What's next?" Sonic smirked and abruptly pinned Shadow to the bed, almost bumping into the headboard and causing the bed to shake from the sudden action. "Sonic, what are you?" "Shh, just let me handle it," Sonic whispered soothingly as he sat up once again. "Turn around."
In 30 seconds.
Shadow grunted. He changed his position, now lying on his stomach. "What is this?" "Ah!" Shadow yelped as Sonic had grabbed his waist and forced his lower half upward. He felt the other give an approving sound and put his hands on both sides of his thighs. Sonic, his legs were slowly spreading further apart, making his bottom stick up even more.
3.
"This position is degrading. Why are you planning to do?" Shadow turned to see a smirk stretching itself across the other's face as he was staring back at him. One of his now gloveless hands caressing one of his white plump buttocks. "You know what? Enough. I won't be able to hold myself back much longer," Sonic mumbled, as he seemed to be entranced by Shadow's toned body. Sonic lowered himself, his face merely inches away from the other's virgin entrance. Shadow could feel him breathe, his hot breath making him even more excited. Sonic stared, his mouth slightly opened, and his eyes half-lidded. He slowly moved forward and buried his muzzle in between Shadow's ass cheeks. Shadow gasped as he felt his tongue slowly lick his testicles to the beginning of his tail. "Oh, Sonic." Sonic smirked at the use of his native name in such a way. He could tell that Shadow was in ecstasy by how his back was arched and his head was raised. He's never seen this side of Shadow, and to be honest, he liked this side better. There was this vibe of innocence that came from Shadow the Hedgehog when it involved matters like this, which made him all the hotter. He looked around the entrance once, circling it with his tongue, teasing him. "Sonic, please," Shadow moaned, his voice low but pleading. Sonic stopped and began running his finger across the other's asshole. "Please what, Shadow?" he said as he played with the short tail of the other. Shadow shivered and let his head fall, looking at the bedsheet beside him. "No, don't do this to me, Sonic. Don't you dare put me in that position." "What do you want me to do, Shads? All you have to do is tell me." Shadow could feel the mocking smirk as he said this.
Go on! No!
I want you to... Yes? To... Shadow's eyes started watering. His cheeks were a deep magenta. As he forced himself to speak his mind. Rape me, please. I want you inside me. I want you to be my first Sonic Who. Sonic smiled sweetly, touched by Shadow's words. I'm happy you feel that way. Just hurry. Without another word, Sonic straightened up and lined his hips up with Shadow's. Placing his hands on Shadow's pelvis, he slowly pushed his penis in until their hips touched. Shadow's mouth was opened in a silent scream as the pain in his rectum was unbearable. His arms buckled beneath him, and he moaned loudly into the pillow placed under him, tears running down his face. Sonic repeatedly thrusted into him. Sonic smirked and leaned forward, nuzzling into the other's neck, his arms now cradling his lover's chest. Oh God, Sonic, he heard Shadow moan into the pillow. He smirked as he thought of something. Do you want more, Shadow? Yes. What do you have in mind? Sonic bit Shadow's shoulders as he reached down and wrapped his hand around the other's penis, stroking it. Shadow gave out a choked moan as he raised his head and opened his eyes. Sonic stroked faster, driving the dark hedgehog further. Suddenly, Sonic straightened out and pulled, stopping all of his actions.
Ends in 30 seconds.
You bastard. Shh. You'll love me again in a second. As Sonic said this, he turned Shadow over, so he was lying on his back, his length fully visible. Shadow looked at him, gasping for air. One of his legs curled towards him. It was a rare sight to see Shadow like this. Sonic felt lucky. He lifted one leg over his shoulder, along with the other one, and pushed himself all the way in one thrust. Shadow groaned and clutched the sheets, smirking. They said, Hedgehog leaned forward once again, his hands on either side of Shadow's head, and thrust into him multiple times, watching as Shadow underneath wriggled and shook, not seeming to be able to control himself. Shadow opened his eyes finally, seeing Sonic look back. They stared at each other, their faces mere inches apart, until Shadow propped himself on his elbows and made their mouths collide. Sonic kissed back without question, their tongues swirling around each other in an erotic dance, separating only for air every couple of minutes. Sonic then opened his eyes and arched his back, his head towards the ceiling as he came. Shadow gasped and moaned as he was filled to the brim with Sonic's jism, some oozing out of his ass, not able to fit anymore. Shadow came shortly after, his semen struding straight into the air, only to come back down. When Sonic was done, he lowered himself slightly and looked at Shadow, only to see he's been covered in his own semen, most of it on his face, and the rest trailing down. He chuckled and began licking him clean, pulling out in the process. He even licked the entrance so forcefully rammed into, making Shadow shiver. He finished and pulled himself up again, face to face with his dark companion. Shadow seemed to be unamused as he stared back, his hands gently brushing to the side of Cobalt's head as they simply laid on each other. I hate you so much, Sonic. Well, at least you may be able to walk tomorrow.
Bitches, how'd you like that bedtime story? Would you rate that shit 8.8 out of 8.8, mate?
Wait.